Greetings to ambassadors, ambassadors representatives, friends from the civil societies, and last but not least, Suaram members. Good morning to all ladies and gentlemen in the hall. 2020 was a challenging year for Malaysia as the nation grappled with not just the pandemic crisis, but the political crisis that has engulfed the whole year. The collapse of the Pakatan Harapan government in February 2020 through non-electoral means has indeed put a major dent on Malaysia's democracy and has betrayed the mandate of the people. Nevertheless, throughout the reign of the Pakatan Harapan government, the human rights commitments that was made under its manifestos were either unfulfilled or completely ignored. Moreover, the greater freedom under the Pakatan Harapan government slowly evaporated when the administration turns back to detention without trial and U-turns on its human rights promises. Therefore, without further ado, I would welcome Mr. Sebagai, the Executive Director of Suaram, to give an opening speech and remarks.
Salam perjuangan dan selamat pagi. Good morning, ambassadors, members of diplomat community, members of civil society organizations, members of media, friends, and everyone. Those who are here, as well as those joining us via Zoom and FB, welcome to launch of Suaram's Nation's Human Rights Report 2020. 2020, as Azura rightly pointed out, was a tumultuous year for Malaysia, with the country grappling with not just the COVID-19 pandemic, but an unprecedented political crisis. The Pakatan Harapan PH government, which was elected in the 14th general election 2018, collapsed when the Prime Minister Mahathir then resigned and was replaced by Berita Nasional PN government headed by new Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin in March 2020. But the historic change of administration in May 2018 that led to formation of Pakatan Harapan government was initially accompanied with a better freedom of expression and some seriousness in implementing some of their election manifesto promises, including to review and abolish draconian laws such as Sedition Act 1948 and many other laws. In fact, they have imposed a moratorium on the use of these laws, some of these laws earlier. Yet, as PH government proceeded, the slew of reform promises in 2018 election manifesto was either ignored or discarded, and the administration even reactivated the use of repressive law until the end of its rule in February 2020. Its successor, the Berita Nasional government, did not reverse the trend and has continued to use the same repressive law up until today. Security laws that permit detention without trial continue to be abused throughout 2020. The pandemic and the restriction of the government did not slow down the use of such laws, which are often justified as the ground of crime prevention. In 2020, Suaram has noted that Security Offences Special Measure Act (SOSMA) was used more often than previous year for cases mostly related to human trafficking. Besides SOSMA, Prevention of Crime Act (POCA) 1959 was another repressive detention without trial law that was also used extensively to combat organized crime. I'm not going to go into the details of the numbers which will be presented later, but overall, we see the trend of increasing usage of these laws, especially the detention without trial laws. Access to justice saw no improvement in 2020, with the cases related to police abuse of power showing no sign of decreasing. Death in custody, chain remands, police shooting continue to happen with no accountability or oversight. Freedom of expression continues to be curtailed in Malaysia, and there are a drastic increase in the application of Communication and Multimedia Act 1998 against speeches that touched on race, religion, and royalty, and also fake news related to COVID-19 on the internet. Furthermore, the abuse of Sedition Act 1948 for political purposes was more prevalent in 2020 as compared to the previous years. The new PN government was less willing to tolerate dissent and did not hesitate to utilize repressive law to curtail and deter public criticism. Suaram has documented a total of 98 cases. They are either arrested, investigated, charged, or found guilty under the Section 233 of Communication and Multimedia Act 1998. in yesterday's news in conjunction with World Press Freedom Day. The Press Freedom Index by Reporters Without Borders revealed Malaysia's rank drop from 101 to 119, a drop of 18 places, which clearly indicate the control and restrictive manner of PN government on press freedom. The freedom of assembly was also heavily curtailed in 2020 due to the movement control order implemented by the government, and there was a tendency of the government to suppress freedom of assembly under the pretext of prevention the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. Aside from the restrictive nature of Peaceful Assembly Act 2012, the Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease measures with Infected Local Areas Regulation 2020 were also used against any kind of assembly during the period of the pandemic. Suaram has documented various abuses of extreme errors executed by the police in the name of preventing the pandemic. Some of the notable examples of such abuses during the movement control order and its various phases included double standard of the arrest of children, migrant and unfair sentencing, extrajudicial punishment, and restriction of press freedom. The implementation of MCO also accentuated the plight of the migrant workers in Malaysia, where their rights are severely curtailed. While the lockdown has highlighted many human rights abuses and exploitation faced by the migrant workers, they further suffer from social stigmatizations because there is no urgency to reform or enact law that offers some protection of the rights of the welfare of the migrant workers. The LGBTIQ community in Malaysia remains a discriminated community, and the government and the public at large have continued to harass, deny their human rights. The threats of violence against the community have not ceased, and there appears to be no political will from both government political coalitions to protect the community from continued discrimination and harassment by the authorities. Suaram's new People Before Profit desk also identify some key areas where the degradation of Malaysian environment through unfettered and deforestation and so-called development has violated the economic, social, and cultural rights of Malaysians, in particular our indigenous people. Suaram has documented cases where developers, with the assistance of federal and or state governments, have acquired lands through high-handed methods from the indigenous community. Controversial land reclamation remains a norm and often at the expense of the economic, social, and cultural rights of the people. These are some of the gists which will be also presented later. As for Suaram, this year will focus more on issues related to torture practices, and we are planning 2 major campaigns this year against torture, which will highlight individual cases through our drawing competition on anti-torture, as well as producing a documentary on torture practices in Malaysia. Suaram will continue to monitor and document human rights violations in Malaysia, and we will fight on against human rights violations in this country. We are taking this opportunity to thank many of you who have assisted directly and indirectly working towards a better state of Malaysian human rights in Malaysia. We will continue to march on despite the pandemic and call end the political crisis. We march together, and once again, welcome to the launch of Malaysian Human Rights Report 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sivan Raisami, for the opening speech. Moving on, I welcome Kanas Chang, Documentation and Monitoring Coordinator, to deliver his insights. Note that this will be on our Facebook Live. Please follow, like, and share at Suaram's Facebook. Thank you.
Alright, sorry, dealing with technical difficulties. Salam sejahtera and selamat pagi. Greetings to ambassadors, representatives of embassies, the diplomatic communities, most importantly, our friends from media and the civil society organization. A very good morning to everyone who has taken the trouble to attend either physically or digitally to the launch of Suaram Human Rights Report 2020. My name is Kenneth Cheng, and I am the Documentation and Monitoring Officer of Suaram, and today also the presenter of the Suaram 2020 Human Rights Report. History will rightly define the year of 2020 as a year of pandemic, but in Malaysia, it has taken on a different meaning too, as it is also a year where an unprecedented political crisis took place. And may I say, some of us are still failing to make sense of what has transpired in February in the political scene, which was now famously known as the Sheraton move. Whatever negotiation and horse trading was in play, the outcome was the ousting of the Pakatan Harapan government and was replaced by the Perikatan National Government headed by the new Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin. It must be noted at that time during 2008, the historic change of administration was initially accompanied with greater freedom and the encouraging promise to review and abolish draconian laws such as the Security of SOSMA and Sedition Act. Yet, as the PH government proceeded to govern, the slew of reform promises in their 2018 election manifesto was either ignored or discarded, and the administration even reactivated the use of detention without trial laws by the end of its rule in February 2020. Its successor, Perikatan National Government, did not reverse such trend, unfortunately, and we have seen human rights violation everywhere in Malaysia since they have come to power. Security laws that are deemed to be draconian by Suaram shows no signs of abating even during a pandemic year. All four laws that permit detention without trial, namely the Security Offences Special Measure Act 2012, the Prevention of Crime Act 1959, the Prevention of Terrorism Act 2015, and the Dangerous Drugs Special Preventive Measure Act 1985, continue to be applied and abused. Possible amendments, as promised by the Pakatan Harapan administration, appears to be a date later now, with its subsequent collapse. And it looks as though the current regime has zero attention to abolish detention without trial laws. Why I may say that? Because when being pressed, they are only provided vague promises like a commitment to improve security laws. Yet, we have no idea what a security law can be improved upon given its draconian nature. Suaram has documented a total of 828 individuals detained under SOSMA for the year 2020, with most of the cases being related to human trafficking, while POCA stood at 667 and have primarily been used for alleged gambling-related operations. Okay, so how does the security law work in Malaysia? Usually under an offence which falls under the Criminal Procedure Code, CPC, the accused will either be remanded for a maximum 7 days or 14 days, depending on the offence, and to be decided by the magistrate. But security laws such as SOSMA, POCA negates CPC, negates and circumvent the CPC and its usual bail procedure and proceed to detain the individual. Under SOSMA, an individual can be detained for no more than 28 days for investigation, while POCA can allow a detention of a maximum 60 days. And of course, no bail are allowed in this occasion except for women, children, or sick persons in SOSMA. As that will defeat, As we proceed to the issue of police power and the rights of an individual to access justice, cases of abuse of power, unfortunately, by the police still continues in 2020, and the sudden change in government has not resulted in any notable or substantial reform of the police force in this country. Deaths in custody, chain remand, and police shootings continue to happen with no accountability or oversight. The new Perikatan National Government promised that there will be a review of the Independent Police Complaints and Misconduct Commission Bill, IPCMC, which was tabled on previously in Parliament by the Pakatan Harapan government. But unfortunately, what they delivered is a new Independent Police Conduct Commission, IPCC bill, and it has been recognized by civil society organizations, including Suaram, as a watered-down version of its predecessor, IPCMC. It is in our view, Suaram's view, that the new IPCC would not properly hold the police accountable for their actions. Nevertheless, One small improvement towards police accountability that should be commended is the police policy by the Home Ministry to equip body cameras on police officers. The ministry has confirmed in Parliament that the procurement of body cameras is expected to be implemented in 2021. One practice that Suaram wished to highlight is the practice of chain remand, which is a direct breach of an individual's right to justice and concerns about the power of enforcement officials, namely the police. Chain remand occurs when a person whose remand period granted by the magistrate courts has expired and he or she is almost immediately rearrested by the police for a different or similar offence. Under a normal remand process, an individual would be arrested for investigation, remanded for a specific time depending on the offence and the magistrate, and will be charged or will be either charged or released depending on police investigation. Yet under chain remand, the individual is rearrested upon release and forced to go through another remand period again and again, rearresting an individual and continually apply for a remand order by the police. This is performed by the police to ensure that the accused remains in the custody of police for whatever reason. Safe to say, chain remand is a direct violation to the CPC Criminal Procedure Code. The practice of rearrest and chain remand through the concurrent application of SOSMA and POCA is also relatively common from Suaram's documentation and monitoring. And in limited cases, even the Prevention of Terrorism Act is used as part of the chain remand process. We can also see how when the practice of chain remand was being used in conjunction with security laws might lead to the individual being detained for more than 80 days without even being charged in court. Firstly, arrested under SOSMA, remanded for 29 days, transferred to POCA detention, and then further remanded for 60 days, and finally only sentenced under POCA for 2 years imprisonment, either in prison or in home arrest. Yeah. On 18th of March 2020, when the Movement Control Order MCO was officially implemented throughout the nation, as a drastic means to control the spread of COVID-19, the police have also been granted extraordinary powers during these times to ensure the restriction is complied with. Suaram has noticed these powers have led to police violated human rights principle on numerous occasions through their arrest and abuse of power. Most commonly, it is the unfair or disproportionate punishment for MCOs violators, while powerful individuals are given preferential treatment. For example, in Tampi, Negeri Sembilan, an 80-year-old man and a 63-year-old woman were fined while waiting for food aid in front of a restaurant in April 2020. The two elderly persons were not able to pay their 1,000 ringgit fine despite attempts by the committee to assist them. Contrast this with the treatment of powerful and political individuals where they will often escape with impunity or soft penalty. Such disproportionate enforcement application has come to define Malaysia in 2020, and the term antara dua darjat, which literally means between two classes in English, has been wildly popularized in Malaysia. Yeah. Aside from that, there were also reports of minors being detained and extrajudicial punishment, such for the example of Ahmad Rahi Bashisan. He was assaulted by 5 police officers for allegedly violating the MCO. There were also mass arrests of undocumented migrants around Kuala Lumpur in the name of containing the spread of COVID-19. Despite the best efforts of NGOs arguing such actions were counterproductive and might render the immigration detention center to become the hotbed for COVID-19, the government persisted with such arrests. Speaking of migrants, the COVID-19 pandemic has indeed exposed the many vulnerabilities faced by the migrants, and they are undoubtedly the hardest hit committee during the MCO. Suaram has noted many employers in Malaysia have committed various kinds of labor-related violations, such as wage deduction and non-payment of salaries of migrant workers. And just like any financial austerity measures in 2020, this was done again under the pretext of adjusting to the new normal of COVID-19 economy. Okay. Sorry. There is also the case that the Defense Minister Ismail Sabri threw a statement saying that the migrants would not be arrested for immigration offences if they come forward for COVID-19 testing and tracing. Yet there were multiple cases where immigration raids were conducted a few days after those health screenings. This has rendered the migrants more afraid of coming forward to the government for testing and training, which makes the fight against the pandemic even harder and more difficult. The violation of the rights of migrants is plenty and can be further found in the report. But one thing that is worth noting, and personally I want to raise it up, is true the plight of migrants has nevertheless exacerbated during this pandemic, but there is also hope that many more Malaysians are beginning to take notice of this issue of migrant rights in Malaysia. And now we turn to the issue of freedom of expression. The improvement under PH has all been evaporated, is undoubtedly clear now, given that this current government has little tolerance towards this dissent. Sedition Act and Communication and Multimedia Act has been used liberally and widely since the PN government has come into power. Most distressingly, PN has also alluded to the possibility of reintroducing the Anti-Fake News Act 2018. The pandemic and the lockdown, in my opinion, have also transformed the idea of freedom of expression into freedom of online expression. And this is perhaps why the CMA, Communication and Multimedia Act, is being used to such extent, and there were instances of banning of parody websites by MCMC. Remember Bermana, anyone? In 2023, there was an unprecedented spike in the use of Section 233 of the Communication and Multimedia Act to combat the circulation of alleged fake news related to COVID-19. The abolishing of the Anti-Fake News Act has not deterred the government from criminalizing freedom of expression in the name of containing fake news. Data obtained from Parliament also further suggests that the investigation and charges laid pertaining to fake news are rapidly increasing and may well exceed the record high in 2017. Although the application of Peaceful Assembly Act against individuals has reduced drastically, as some of the media friends can see in their press statement, from Suaram press statement, it must be noted that the right of Malaysians to assemble peacefully in 2020, at least in the first half of the year, was largely curtailed due to the implementation of movement control orders by the government in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Aside from the Peaceful Assembly Act, and just as my Executive Director has noted, the Prevention and Control of Infectious Diseases Act 1988 has also been used during the pandemic year to either penalize or deter assembly or protest. For gender and sexuality, the rights of the LGBTIQ persons continue to regress under the Perikatan National Coalition. The COVID-19 pandemic has also exacerbated many forms of inequalities and marginalizations of the LGBTIQ group. This includes increased domestic violence and mental health burden, and the increased vulnerability to profiling based on gender expression. For example, in the report, we have documented 2 cases of queer men were harassed at police roadblocks, trans women mysteriously rounded up and taken to government temporary shelter. In 2020, Suaram's new desk, People Before Profit, monitored the profit-oriented economic projects under the Federal Perikatan National Government, as well as those of the respective governments, some of which were run by the PH state government, and this is done in order to gauge how they affected the lives of the people, mainly the Orang Asli and all the indigenous people. Overall, Suaram have observed that the situation on the ground had not changed much since because land reclamation and deforestation of indigenous people's land are still happening with impunity. Evictions of residents without proper discussion and conversation was also well documented by the People Before Profit desk, and this has happened at Kampung Manis Perai, Pulau Pinang, the Penang Island, and at Jalan Atas Palo, Kota Baru, Kelantan. Logging concessions also continue to be awarded by the state government without proper consent from the indigenous people. This includes Kampung Ong Jakim Perak and Penang village of Long Malo, Sarawak. 2020 was the infamous year for Selangor state government because of the issue of the public water supplies due to its constant disruption. There was a total of 9 cases of pollution of water intake rivers in Selangor that has been documented by the People Before Profit. Some quick reforms suggested by the former SPAN chairman, Charles Santiago, and also the Member of Parliament for Klang, include the setting up of National River Protection Authority, creating a buffer of 300 to 400 meters inland from all rivers where business activity should not be allowed to prevent the pollution of the river, and long-term reforms on water conservation and demand management, which basically democratize the whole idea of water management in Malaysia. Suaram believes that the critical point to solve this Selangor's water crisis is if the state governments and federal government have the political will to overrule the business interests. This includes strict penalties for the polluters, introduction of a truer democratic water management system, treating water as part of the rights of an individual, and eliminating cronyism and nepotism in infrastructure management. Finally, as I come to the end of my presentations, may I just add that the pandemic in 2020 has certainly shown up some of the worst cases of human rights violations in Malaysia, while the whole country has been in lockdown. While the theme of 2021 for the world will undoubtedly be vaccination, but let it be no doubt that Malaysia is still struggling for a vaccination that truly upholds the principles of human rights as enshrined in our federal constitution. For a multiracial country like Malaysia, it is my hope that we realize that the pandemic does indeed do not recognize religion, race, or nationality, and this is a fact should likewise be applied to the protection of human rights in Malaysia. Thank you all, and may the fourth be with you.
Thank you, Kenneth Chang, for the speech and insights. Now I welcome again Kenneth and Diane Sabari and one of our board of directors, Mr. Arun, for the launching. And also our members can also come in front for photograph session.
Sorry. Next, yeah.
Okay, please make sure everyone receives one copy of the report and one copy of the mark. So for the next session, for the Q&A, I would like to call upon Stephen, Director and Kenneth, thanks, and also Muhammad Asasi to sit in front of the. So I open the floor, I open the questions to the floor before we go to online questions in Zoom and Facebook. Anyone have questions?
Sir, Thailand here from the Canadian Acquisition. Just a question of yours, of course. Since we've had two former IGPs which will come out and state that there is intervention in direct handling, which is the police force work, are you going to use this as better to further push for the IPCMC?
Yeah, two different things. One is the IGP's regulation on the interference, right? Yes, so this is clearly abuse of power, and there's also calls to get the Home Minister to explain the interference, and also there was a debate as well ongoing that as a Home Minister he sits on the SPP, the Suranjaya Pemilihan, as a chair, but the regulation is clearly interfering because the IGP has the power to propose and also suggest in terms of appointments, right? So that's very clearly an abuse of power. But in terms of IGP, there's issue on cartel and also a misuse of power within the police force, as well as the corruption within the police force. And in one of our recent statements, we also state that when IGP himself don't really trust on JIPS, the Jabatan Integrity, the Integrity Department, which is supposed to do the complaints against police misuse of power, when our IGP, now former IGP, even don't really trust, as well as the State Police Chief, Johor State Police Chief. That's one of the strong reasons why the government immediately needs IPCMC. Whereas we also been recording the abuse of power not only within the police force. When the police officer, when arrested someone, we have recorded numerous cases of torture practice in the police force. And the reason why is also death in custody of Ganapati. And although the Gombak OCPD denied there's no sign of torture practice, but the post-mortem revealed there's a lot of injuries. And where do we go to complain against the misuse of power of the police force when JIPS is failing us? I mean, there are so many reports that JIPS is already failing and IGP's comment on JIPS. So this is the high time the current government, although they are afraid to convene the parliament, but IPCMC is at the highest need for the country now.
Another matter is the revelation by ICC said that if the member of the ICC the meeting of FPT also read to see that there's no things that we discussed. So I think in investigations to get police abuse, and it involves rigorous investigations and it involves like people by experience in handling misuse of power among the authorities. So I think it shows that efficiency is really needed because first the MPP doesn't really the meeting doesn't have nothing much to discuss, and as we proposed before that, efficiency should have the power to take and obtain evidence. So without this thing, I think efficiency, if implemented, also will be suffering the same fate as if there is no given power to efficiency. That's how it is.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Adrian, and I'm representing the North South Initiative. Thanks for including a chapter on migrant rights in the report. I think as I was reading the report, it's helped me realize that more and more how connected and influential the civil and political rights of the migrant and refugee is connected to their economic, social, and cultural rights. I think the Civicus report also establishes that point. So we're very grateful for that. My question is related to the arrest and detention procedures related to migrants and refugees. And I'm getting a very strong sense from the cases we manage. There is another set of standards followed by the authorities, and this is mind-boggling. So, for example, if you watch the movies, when someone is arrested, they get a phone call. And the authorities are telling me, no, a refugee doesn't get a phone call. The asylum seeker doesn't get a phone call. The case that we handled, Mr. Rafiullah, he died before even getting that phone call and even before meeting his family. So I need you to explain to me, is there any technical difference or differentiation between the arrest and detention of a migrant and a Malaysian? Because many of them are dying in the gutter for no reason. Thanks.
I think the most prominent difference between the migrant arrest and Malaysian arrest is the 14 days immigration detention, which is quite compulsory. It's not compulsory, it's common practice among immigration. Is they arrest the migrants, they will put them under these 14 days of remand. So on top of any other remand that they investigated in, like they involved in other things that police want to charge them, so that will be on top of the 14 days. So I think because they are, like I said, they are vulnerable and they don't get the same treatments like the phone calls, they don't have any like the similar contact and also similar support from their families, let's say. So they're prone to more abuse, the abuse in particular. So I think the 14 days to be dropped by the immigration. If there are cases involving other things, there's no need for the 14 days to verify. The 14 days is used to verify their status. But now with the technological advances, I don't think that we need 14 days of detention to determine someone's status, right? So I think that's the biggest differences, like the 14 days of detention. And also, I think that you mentioned, often they don't get the phone call, the other rights that they should have, and also what we monitor also, if like their family members want to meet them, they will need to pay like around 200 to 500 ringgit just for a phone call with their family members. And this shows that we have a lot of corruption happening not only in the police station but also in the immigration detention.
No, there is no particular analysis on that, but the cases on Malaysian that we receive also, some of the cases facing the similar issue. Some family members, the wife claiming that the police not communicating and refuse to answer for say about the first remand period, probably the 4 plus 7 days. In some COSMA cases, yes, weeks. But if you are influential, If you have a connection, then it's a different story. So I'm not very sure that applies immigration detention as well. But bottom line is the access to the lawyer, access to the family members should be given. The communication should immediately come within the forward or during the remand, right? In immigration supporting group. Yeah. Any other questions? And also, the thing I wanted to add is, it depends sometimes on the reason Ganapathi's case. There's also claim that this one particular community, Indian community, are more being targeted in terms of a death in custody. But in the record, in the statistics, it shows otherwise. There's also numbers of Malay have died in custody as well. It all depends which part of the statistic you want to pick and you want to speak. But the abuse is cut across. Although there are some patterns, but the abuse is cut across. So we have recorded, regardless, basically most of them are about B40, the poorer side of the community.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Koo. I just want to follow up the question about IPCC compared to the IPCMC. But right now, what we have is the EAIC, right? And under the EAIC Act, the EAIC has the power to investigate. Doesn't even need to wait for it launch investigation, what we call suo motu, on its own motion. But if you look back over the years, even the EAIC with the power to investigate has not really done very many investigations. So what is the thinking, or what is the strategy in trying to persuade the government not only to have an IPCMC, not an IPC, but then to ensure that the IPCMC actually undertakes quite a lot of investigation. So it's not just a theoretical power, but something that they will actually do. Is there any encouragement, advocacy directed in this regard? Thank you.
Okay, first EAIC, under its purview, there are 18 or 20 enforcement agency under their purview. So their focus is why? IPCMC solely on police. So that's the first thing. So IPCMC, we have a commission for you to complain on the police misuse of power and also complain on police. So I think with the enough numbers, they're able to investigate and focus on the police. The rest is what power is being given to the IPCMC. So that's why there's a huge comparison. Maybe Mark can elaborate that we are putting forward on IPCMC compared to IPCC, which was very much watered down. But having said that, point on Andrew, when Suaram was first formed, there was a lot of questions how we wanted to ensure the appointment and then also who's going to be the members of Suaram. There's also issues. We are not saying that once IPCMC is there, then everything is going to be good. You have to continuously monitor and then come out with the report on the performance of the IPCMC as well. So this is part of our collective work. Even when you have a commission, then you need to come up with annual report or annual monitoring on the particular commission and their performances on that. So, going to say that we try to advocate for IPCMC, not IPCC, right? I think on that matter, yeah, since the previous, I think during the Grange administration, yeah, we had a lot of rules for this to go inside anything, to discuss with the Ministry of Law on the bill itself, and then when it's about to be tabled again, we were dijemput untuk berikan maklumat in the session of in the consultation session, right? But since at the end takeover, there's no room at all to talk about this, for the consultation. There's no consultation being done on CSO, and then
that's when the bill is changed to, I think, from it's not IPCC to say since the time, but it was changed to IPCC during the VN time, right? So, but again, it's not disabled and it's not been brought for discussion. And on your point of having like the IPCC that is effective, I think that's also the main reason, the main point of ensuring that is the head of the IPCC. So we need to ensure that there is no police involved as the commission, and also it is really independent, and also it involves like people who are well versed in investigations. So on whether they will take up more cases than EIC or not, and what grounds will they have. I think another point is that they should have the power to maybe mencadangkan untuk prosecution lah. But I don't know whether, I'm not really well versed into the prosecution power like the SDLM has, but I think they should have that degree of power. I think yes.
Hi, my name is Anusha. I'm from Thomas. Firstly, congratulations to Suaram for your launch. My question pertains to the right to legal recourse. So you've documented 98 cases, right? I think what you said. So my understanding is that human rights are guaranteed to all persons. So you have documented those violations of human rights. So how many of these 98 cases do the people actually seek legal recourse and say, go to court and initiate an action to bring the perpetrators to justice? Because the whole process is not just documenting the violations, but also getting the justice part. I want to know what happens after the document.
Now, if I got it correctly, so what do you do after documenting all 98? Is it? You mean define the case at the court? We do have the breakdown, right? Yes. The numbers of charges and number of charges.
Yeah. So basically, the 98 cases that I mentioned just now are all mostly communications and multimedia act. 98 cases. So they are either arrested, charged, or found guilty. So of course, in terms of legal recourse, because from a monetary perspective, if you're looking at from newspaper and all this, and sometimes when this person has been, let's say, has been found to be parodying the prime minister, so then it's immediately like 2 days, 1 day being charged, and less than 3 or 4 days, then he's been found guilty of 5,000 fines. So if you speak of legal recourse, then there probably is not. And this I would emphasize mostly happens to the people, those who are on the cliff of the society. Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at the table there, there's a column on the status of the case. So either it's mentioned arrested, and there are also some cases under investigation, and some cases charged. So that's the description of the particular cases in 2020. So there's some certain cases that we continue to monitor. We will do the updated report the next following years, what happens to their charges and whether they have been sentenced and all that. But not all the cases.
One or two specific people abuse a man or a kid. So what would happen to the policemen who are the perpetrators who actually violate the human rights? So are they, what happens to them?
Nothing. So that's just CMA, right? There's death in custody cases, nothing happened to the policeman. In many cases. In CM, it's very difficult. Question what happened to the policeman or the perpetrator. Yeah, Adrian.
Sorry for hogging the mic. Sivan and friends in Suaram, just want to raise up the issue on death in custody. The migrants, they are put in a place called the Immigration Detention Center. And in Sabah, things are a bit more rougher. There's a place called Temporary Detention Center. So there are friends from the other side of the border who are documenting this. In the few cases that came to me, there's about 3 or 4. It's not an automatic process where a coroner's inquest is kicks in. And there are other factors involved who would then do certain things to prevent that from happening, especially getting the body repatriated as soon as possible, discouraging the family member or putting pressure on them or pushing for an inquest. So once again, I see for a migrant or a refugee, the process is a bit more complicated. So I know that you said that abuse happens across the board, but I'm seeing certain vulnerabilities and technicalities that could make it difficult for an inquest for a migrant to happen. So I hope that we can work together to find out what is these gaps legally, technically, and bring justice to these families. Right?
Agreed. Any other questions? Yeah.
Good morning, Jockey and Brother, Australian High Commission. I wanted to first congratulate you on this report and the level of detail and meticulousness which you've gone about it to the dedication and real credit to the You mentioned SOSMA and how in relation to human trafficking, that it might be conceived as negative. Can you explain that? I would have thought it's a positive, the increasing use of SOSMA to deal with the levels of sophistication and privatization of the problem.
If I get the question correctly, you're asking the effectiveness of SOSMA?
Yeah, I was asking whether it's considered a positive or a negative, because in relation to human trafficking, it's a sophisticated and complex problem.
Okay. Any law that used with the pretext of detention without trial, and we don't see the effectiveness of any detention without trial law since 1960, when the government started using Internal Security Act, which allow the authority to keep you under remand for 60 days and then extend to 2 years of detention. Then what happened to actual investigation? In some cases, for example, the Wang Lian cases, we remember there were some authorities were arrested under SOSMA. And then what happened to that investigation? If you don't charge them in the open court and go ahead with court proceeding, you don't know what is the exact story. So in most of the cases, SOSMA is being kept. SOSMA is being kept very secretively. So you don't even have the access on the investigation. But what they're using SOSMA is, in most of the cases, torture you to get you to admit on the certain offenses. If I got that correctly.
There's also active SOM to deal with trafficking.
Yeah. So it means there are SOSMA, you can't charge someone under SOSMA. All you do is it's a measurement to keep you 28 days to interrogate you or investigate on you. And then subsequently you use penal code to charge you. So when you already have the penal code and also already have the usual remand process, why you need the extensive use of remand here? That's the big question. So you are going to use the same law to make it effective to reduce the number of trafficking. But here, why you need this additional abusive measurement? That's the big question. So the other one, going back to Adrian, So although we are doing the monitoring for past many years, it's very difficult to obtain statistics and also data, except for some reported in the media. So we gather that. Otherwise, you have to rely on the parliamentarian to put forward the question in the parliament and then you get the statistics. Because there is no practice by the government department to have an annual report on certain area, especially numbers of detention under the immigration law, numbers of detention, death in custody, numbers of people died in prison. They don't come out with annual statistic on that. For many years, statistic and data on the immigration detention center remains a black hole. You don't get it until we put Suaram to get the data from the immigration detention center. When they got it, the government put a note that this is under OSA, Official Secret Act. So even Suaram at that point of time couldn't reveal. But after some time, we receive a package and then we reveal that, and then the government start to give data on the immigration detention centers. And it was, for us, numbers of death in immigration detention centers much higher compared to police detention or prison department in Malaysia. So for certain extent, the practices, there's a double standard in terms of the practices, and this data we need to bring it out to expose what is really happening in the immigration detention center. Still remains as a big secret what is really happening inside the immigration detention center.
I think there's no questions through Zoom. Maybe Suaram try and answer it. The question is, Suaram has documented cases by developers with the assistance of federal or state governments have acquired land through high-hand methods from the indigenous community. Is there more info on this? Report.
Yes, okay. My name is Suresh. I'm coordinator for the People Before Profit Desk in Suaram. So for the indigenous community, yes, we do media monitoring. And some cases we got it through from media, and also some cases from Suaram's personal involvement in the land grabbing issues, such as in Muatan, Kelantan, and also in Kuala Lumpur. So both cases are mentioned in our report, and wherever the cases is from media monitoring, the reference is quoted in the footnote.
Is there any last questions before we end the session? If no, then maybe we can end this. So as I said, everyone will receive one copy of our annual report. So to anyone who needs extra copy, you can ask for it. Or if there's no available anymore, you can email us and we can post it to you. And once again, thank you everyone for participating in this meeting. We really appreciate it. And so I end this with thank you and take care everyone.
Thank you everyone.
So I guess that's why maybe this is target government officers like law development. So even they reserve some factors is that they are starting to stick to their principles. Oh, hello. We had the dialogue few weeks ago.
What about you?